Thank you, and good morning, dear colleagues. I want to thank the Minister of Culture and the members of Parliament, and also the sponsors of this wonderful conference, the Lithuanian Association of Museums and the Lithuanian National Committee of ICOM, for inviting me to be your keynote speaker at this conference. The theme of this conference is of critical importance and raises pivotal issues about how we will sustain museums in the 21st century and how we will engage our constituencies, visitors, collectors, scholars, public officials, media, and financial supporters in our work. I'm especially grateful to the U.S. Embassy, Jonathan Berger, Nina Murray, Urata Bukuti, and their colleagues who have arranged for my travel to Lithuania and for my participation in this program. And to Dr. Lolita Jablonskina, Chief Curator at the National Gallery of Art, I thank you for organizing a wonderful tour of 5 museums in one day yesterday in Vilnius, a tour that included several museums, the National Museum of Lithuania, the Vilnius University Museum, the National Gallery of Art, the Museum of Tolerance, and the Lithuanian Art Museum. It was a challenging but very rewarding experience. I met many impressive colleagues, and it leaves me wanting to stay even longer in this city with such a rich heritage. Finally, I want to recognize Dr. Ramunas Kondratis, a colleague from the Smithsonian Institution who is now the director of the Vilnius University Museum. He is one of the finest curators of medical history in the world, and he has made enormous contributions at the Smithsonian, and I'm so pleased to see that he is now making enormous contributions here in Lithuania. I'm grateful to be invited to Lithuania for personal reasons. I am a Litvak. My great-grandfather, Joseph Mordecai Glass, emigrated to New York from Lithuania, probably in 1884 from Kaunas, and his wife and children followed him in the next several years. He and many of his relatives, Dretsins, Prades, Libos, Shapiros, and others with roots in Lithuania, are buried in a family cemetery in Queens, New York. So as you can see, I have a keen interest in family history, and I plan to pursue this personal journey with a visit to Kaunas tomorrow. Before I talk about strategies for sustaining museums in the 21st century, I want to talk about public memory in America. By public memory, I refer to the way we remember history through public events, celebrations, monuments, memorials, and museum exhibitions. The way we remember history changes in each generation and often says more about our own times and our historical institutions than about the events themselves. The public memory story that I want to share with you tonight, this morning, concerns the American Civil War, which is arguably the most defining event in American history. Now, tomorrow, September 22nd, Americans will celebrate the 150th anniversary of a pivotal event in that war, the announcement of the Emancipation Proclamation by President Abraham Lincoln. The public memory of the Emancipation Proclamation is fascinating for 2 reasons. First, many Americans think and believe incorrectly that the Emancipation Proclamation abolished slavery. It did not. That happened 2 years later with the passage of an amendment to our Constitution. The Emancipation Proclamation abolished slavery in the territories that were in rebellion against the federal government. Nevertheless, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation is regarded as one of the great documents in the cause of human freedom. Lincoln himself thought that this was his greatest achievement, and he was known throughout the world as the great emancipator. The second reason that the Emancipation Proclamation, the public memory of the Emancipation Proclamation is interesting, is that for many years after the Civil War, Americans did not even want to acknowledge that the practice of human slavery existed in our country for more than 2 centuries. So when it was time to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Civil War in the 1960s, 50 years ago, Americans were still struggling with how to remember this event. Now, please remember that the 1960s was a time of the civil rights movement in America, a grassroots protest, nonviolent protest movement led by Dr. Martin Luther King to end racial segregation and discrimination. The 1960s was also a time of international tensions with the Soviet Union, a period we know as the Cold War. So you can imagine the ambivalence of American leaders who were planning to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Civil War in the 1960s, a war that was fought to end slavery, while black citizens were in the streets of America demanding freedom and equality. Engaged in a propaganda war with the Soviet Union over the value and benefits of democracy, Americans were more concerned about displaying unity and patriotism than in conducting a serious exploration of slavery and race relations and the causes and consequences of the Civil War. The tension over how to observe the centennial of the Civil War reached a boiling point in September 1962, 50 years ago. It was the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. Some Americans wanted to avoid any mention of what they called modern-day problems, referring to the civil rights movement. A National Civil War Centennial Commission planned a major ceremony at the Lincoln Memorial on September 22nd, 1962, 50 years ago tomorrow. The National Civil War Commemoration Commission wanted to project an international image and invited leaders of various countries to participate in this ceremony. They did not, however, invite any African Americans as speakers and only had token representation of the black community in the form of musical performers. This omission enraged civil rights leaders, including Dr. King. And the commemoration, and he called on President Kennedy to issue a new Emancipation Proclamation in 1962. This did not happen, and the commemoration of the Emancipation Proclamation anniversary was a very subdued and quiet event. This year, however, I'm happy to report that we are finally recognizing and talking honestly about the Civil War, about how the issue of slavery divided our nation, and how the Emancipation Proclamation brought about what Abraham Lincoln called a new birth of freedom. In fact, President Obama now proudly displays a copy of the Emancipation Proclamation on the wall in the Oval Office in the White House. Museums and historical organizations are leading the national commemoration this year, and more importantly, they're leading the national conversation about the Emancipation Proclamation, the Civil War, and its significance. The reason I tell this story about public memory is that there is a powerful connection. There is a powerful connection between public memory, how we remember history, and how we sustain museums in the future. The central issue is trust. Museums are institutions of public trust. We know that our visitors trust museums because we present exhibitions and programs that are based on sound scholarship and critical analysis of historical and scientific evidence. Regardless of whether a museum is about history, art, science, archaeology, ethnography, or folklore, maintaining public trust is critical to our survival in the future. No amount of success in marketing or technological innovation or fundraising will substitute for the vital role of research and scholarship and preservation that plays in sustaining our institutions. Now, I'm going to make predictions about 10 strategies, 10 issues that will shape museums over the next 10 years, over the next decade. With the rapid changes that are taking place in technology, with the shifts in our economic and political environment, and with the constant pressure for education reform, it is very risky to forecast beyond 10 years. and probably foolish even to venture that far. Now, you may disagree with me on these 10 issues, and you may find there are serious omissions in my list. I welcome your comments, and I hope we'll have time for a discussion at the conclusion of this program. Here are the top 10 issues that will shape the future of museums over the next 10 years. Now, I must first tell you my conclusion before I get started. The future of museums is bright. I strongly believe that museums will continue to play a critical role that they have played for the past 2 centuries. And I think the Minister of Culture made this point quite eloquently earlier. The mission to collect and preserve and study the art, science, history, and culture of human civilization, and to make these collections and scholarship accessible to the general public and to scholars, teachers, and students. I also believe that sustaining museums in the future will require innovative thinking, especially about collaborations with other institutions. And museums are fun. They are great places to visit, great places to work for, and we need to remember that when we think seriously and we take time to think seriously about museums. Let's remember that they are fun places to visit and to work. Now for my predictions. Number 1, governance and management. Museums will need to develop a new generation of trustees, of governors, who will accept as their principal responsibility the financial health of the institution. Without this commitment, museums cannot achieve their mission. Boards of trustees must also be representative of the diversity of the community in which they are located. Museum directors will be trained as leaders and managers who understand how to work with boards of trustees, the public sector and private sector. They must have the ability to build teams of professionals and volunteers and to integrate planning, marketing, and fundraising along with scholarship and collecting. Issue number 2, shared authority. Within the museum, interdisciplinary teams, curators, educators, project managers, designers, fabricators, communication specialists, these teams will create exhibitions and programs as co-equals. In addition, and this is one of my most important points, in addition, museum audiences will play a greater role in contributing content and expertise and will influence the direction of museums as participants in planning and evaluation. The successful museums of the future will be the ones that invest in and nurture a working relationship with their audience. When I visit a museum, I like to play a game, and the game is called Who Won the Exhibition? The curator, the educator, the designer, the director, the sponsor. In the end, the audience should be the winner of an exhibition or program. Does this make sense to you? Issue number 3, collections. The care, conservation, and management of collections will be high priorities. Investment in what I call the invisible museum, storage, environmental conditions, security, conservation, and record keeping will ensure the fulfillment of the core mission of all museums. Let's remember that just because a collection is in a museum, that does not mean we should assume the collection is saved. We must invest in the care of collections. Issue number 4, education. Museums will be valued and utilized as essential educational resources. In addition to the content available in art, history, and science museums, developing the skills of visual and social literacy will be accepted and encouraged as significant learning outcomes. Issue number 5, program development. Investments in program development, lectures, films, performances, experiential learning, field schools, and travel will increase in the future and will be seen as equal in value to exhibitions in fulfilling the museum's mission. I believe that gaming now a popular form of recreation for millions of people, can be one of the most creative opportunities for new programs in museums. Number 6, planning. Museums must place a high priority on planning at all levels. Some of the plans that have been most important to me in my career are master planning, strategic planning, business planning, communications planning, fundraising planning, collections planning, and emergency planning. All of us have been involved in museums. We all have to face an emergency at one time or another, a power outage, a flood, a hurricane. Something always happens, and it's important to have an emergency plan. And of course, exhibition and program planning will remain at the heart of the museum enterprise. Issue number 7, financial resources, financial resourcing. Building a diversified portfolio of revenue will be the key to sustaining museums in the future. Income from admissions, especially from tourists, will become less important, while revenue from memberships, programs, special events, product development and licenses, and other business initiatives will command greater attention. Building endowments and creating naming opportunities will also result in more sustainable institutions in the future. Now, in downplaying the importance of revenue from tourism, I acknowledge that I'm acknowledging my observation that museums have too often overpromised and underdelivered when making the case for major new construction or expansion projects. We need to be careful not to promise too much, that our revenue and that our operations will be sustained by admission from revenue from admission. Issue number 8, technology. Museums will master and take the lead in adapting the power of new information and communications technology. A variety of traditional functions, such as research and access to collections, will benefit from this technology. On-site engagement through mobile devices and social media will become a vital part of the visitor experience. Museums will not only provide access to content and collections, but will allow visitors to manipulate images and content in the future. Social media, through the computer and mobile devices, will be the main drivers of attendance, especially among younger audiences. Issue number 9, partnerships. Museums will become partners with organizations that share our values and core mission of education and civic engagement, including collecting institutions such as zoos, aquariums, and botanical gardens, performing arts organizations, media, schools, libraries, colleges, and universities will become major partners. Partnerships with the hospitality industry, convention and conference centers, hotels, and restaurants will also contribute to sustaining museums in the future. And issue number 10, civic value. Museums will be valued as public institutions that create civic value in their communities. It is very difficult to measure civic value, but I am convinced that museums need to understand and make the argument that they play a vital role in sustaining a civilized society. I think the Minister of Culture made this point very eloquently this morning. Museums need to make their case for funding and community support based on the social and cultural capital they create, not merely on the promise of economic revitalization. I want to say a little bit more about this. Museums create civic value in 3 ways. 1, through the stewardship of material culture and scholarship related to those artifacts and objects that we call collections. This is our patrimony, our gift to future generations. Number 2, museums are places of active learning where young people are introduced to the wonders of science, art, and history, and where lifelong education reaches its full potential. And number 3, museums are safe places that stimulate social and cultural literacy. They offer a setting that provides equal and easy access and that promotes social interaction regardless of education, income, age, or ethnicity. Museums are one of the best places I know to practice being a citizen in a free society. For this reason, and for all the other reasons I have talked about this morning, I believe that the future of museums is bright, and I am very proud and excited to be part of that future. Now, I'd like to show you just a few images of the National Museum of American History to illustrate the points that I have made. The National Museum of American History is located on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. How many of you have been to the Smithsonian or to the National Museum? A couple of hands have raised. Well, please consider this an open invitation to you to visit Washington. When you do visit Washington, please come to the museum. The museum is located in the heart of the memorial landscape of Washington. The Lincoln Memorial is at one end, the U.S. Capitol at the other end of the National Mall, the Jefferson Memorial, the White House, and then here's the museum right in the heart of the memorial landscape of Washington, D.C. This is the National Mall of Washington. The Smithsonian Castle is right across the National Mall, and here's the Museum of American History, a very large, the largest and most popular history museum in the United States. We have a vast collection, millions of objects, including a wonderful collection of coins and currency, and I want to share one example of our collection. It's really an international collection, and I thought that you here in this audience might appreciate the fact that we have representation from Lithuania from the 1930s in our coin and currency collection. Now, I mentioned master planning. When I was director of the museum, we had no master plan when I became director, and one of my goals was to create a master plan, an overview, a framework for making decisions about the development of our museum. We engaged a major architectural firm, Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, and we created a plan that organized our thinking about the space of this very, very large museum complex. We divided it into workspace, public space, and building space, and in the middle created our vision for the museum in the future. We organized each floor around certain themes, and then also organized our workspaces in such a way that made a more coherent organization of our museum. We created a public square, a place for public ceremony and for events and special occasions. And this public square is located right at the entrance to our #1 museum gallery, which showcases the Star-Spangled Banner, the flag that inspired our national anthem. This is an image of that gallery, and this is one of the really patriotic experiences that people have when they come to Washington, D.C. They see the Lincoln Memorial, they see the Washington Monument, the White House, and they also come to see the flag, the Star-Spangled Banner. We also created new galleries, and I use this slide to point out the fact that we recognize our donors, and we rely on private donations to create our special changing galleries. In this case, Susan and Elihu Rose were our sponsors for our exhibition gallery, and the first exhibition honored Abraham Lincoln on the occasion of the 200th anniversary of his birth. This was in 2009. And before I retired as director of the museum, I had the privilege to escort President Obama and his daughters on a tour of this exhibition. We also use objects to tell stories, and we also positioned our collections in such a way that some of our landmark objects have a place of prominence. This is a very simple lunch counter from the 1960s, and I mentioned the Civil Rights Movement. This lunch counter was located in Greensboro, North Carolina, one of our states, and 4 students staged a nonviolent protest in February 1960, and Their protest launched a movement of sit-ins and protests throughout the southern part of our country that eventually led to the desegregation of public facilities in the United States. Three of those students were still living, and we honored them on the 50th anniversary of their protest. But we also stage theatrical performances around our landmark objects. And this is a reenactment of a protest in which we invite visitors to participate in a training session to learn about the principles of nonviolent protest. So the principles of the 1960s and the experience of the 1960s, we tried to bring that to the floor of the museum. We also use the public space for ceremonies. In this case, Mrs. Obama donated her gown, her inaugural gown, to the museum, and we had a wonderful ceremony in which she made that presentation. We use our space for ceremonies such as naturalization programs, where new citizens take the oath of citizenship on the floor of the museum. And for our visitors, this is a very memorable occasion where they can actually witness new citizens taking the oath of citizenship. We encourage experiential learning. Experiential education is a critical part of the museum experience. And please notice that I'm showing you images that don't just include exhibitions. We're really thinking of the museum public space as a place where education can occur and where the content of our research can be shared with the public. In fact, we're developing, the next phase of development at the museum is an entire wing of the museum dedicated to education and to active learning. And that will be located in a prominent location on the first floor of the museum. We are always developing our website, our social media, our interaction online with the public, and we are putting more and more of our collections online. And the thought is that the more we put online and on our website, the more people will want to come to the museum and see the real thing. And finally, I want to invite you to send an email to me. My email address is here on this slide, but I include this slide because I mentioned that President Obama has put the Emancipation Proclamation on the wall of the Oval Office in Washington in the White House, and I had the privilege of representing the museum on that occasion, which was also on Martin Luther King's birthday in 2010. I'm very grateful for your attention this morning. I look forward to sharing ideas with you during the course of this day, and I thank you for the privilege of being your speaker at this conference. Thank you.